morning guys, and welcome back to my Facebook live stream. My name is Cheng. I'm a professional photographer, filmmaker and an Olympus ambassador. So if you're new to this stream and this is all about, yes of course, photography, filmmaking, Michael Forther, and especially Olympus gears. And welcome back. Yes, good morning Ralph, good morning Mark, good morning Trevor and Brad. Oh, you're at work today. Okay, yes, definitely check me out later. That's not a problem. Remember, all the live stream that you have missed on Facebook is being archived in my personal YouTube channel, which the link is down in the description later on. Okay, so that is all good. So we do have a topic today that you already seen listed on the screen. But first of all, let's give you a general update about everything. So far so good. My family is all right. The lockdown continues in London, even though that we are now allowed to go out for recreational purposes. There's no time limit whatsoever. That means technically I can go and enjoy the sun and take my camera and do something. However, and being a responsible father, of course, I don't want to, or I would like to limit the risks of exposed to potential danger that can possibly affect my children. So I'm still trying to limit myself of the going out business. So I'm still staying at home. Kind of. Anyway, so this is kind of my life so far. I'm still producing video. I'm still making a couple of projects and finalizing a couple of things that I need to do. And once that is done, my review videos are back on my YouTube channel. And I'm still working hard at the moment, trying to figure out what I can create and in the home environment, and maybe some in the back garden, some in the front, something. I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to do that, because I do have starting to accumulate now. I do starting to have a lot of boxes, and I just received another email from one of my collaborators are sending me another box. So yes, more stuff are coming, and seriously, it's getting to becoming a mountain now, and I really need to get on with my video productions. I mean, it's not a stress or pressure in any sort, but then I just enjoy doing it. However, just because the current situation is really difficult for me to head out and do something. So but that's fine. I said no problem. Good morning Sam, good morning, excellent. Thank you for joining me back again. So yes, we do have a topic a bit today, and I already mentioned in my post about today's stream, should you be afraid of shooting high ISO? Of course, this is gonna be exciting, kind of, because like Ralph's actually suggested, and Brad also suggested, this topic has been covered recently by my dear friends Robin in Malaysia, and also Peter Forsgaard in Finland, Helsinki. They cover the technicality of ETTR, whether that is actually a proper way to shoot in low light situation to basically maximizes the image quality by reducing the noise level of the image. Sounds very technical. I know. My take on this is, being a professional photographer who shoot constantly in low light situation, like such as weddings, location portraits and stuff like that, lighting can be always an issue for me. But because I've been there, I've done it day in, day out as my kind of work consistently. I can tell you a thing or two about shooting in lower light situation, whether ETTR works for me or not. Okay, first of all, judging from what they already explained about the technicality of ETTR, which was originally obviously invented for landscape photographers, it maximizes the actual saturations and dynamic range. And technically, if I can basically enhances the explanation just a little bit more about that point. Right, when they say maximizes the dynamic range and saturations of those pixels in digital photography, this theory has always been there. And it's not about shooting exposed to the right, it's actually exposed to the shadow. Right, listen carefully, because in film photography, if you look at the landscape photography, what they always do, they always use gradual filters, yeah? Because why? You have a high contrast scene very, very often. It's a common thing in landscape photography. You have the really nice, beautiful sky there, whether it's going to be bright blue, whether it's going to be sunset, and then you have the foreground. And if you want to capture that really lovely sky colors, and most likely your foreground will be underexposed. And what you're going to do, you put in the slapping, sorry, not slapping, exposed to the shadow, bring up the shadow area so that they are all correctly exposed first, the foreground and all the leaves, foliages, and flowers, everything has to be get the proper exposure so you can see all the colors and stuff like that. Then you slap on a gradual filter to darken the sky, and this is essentially exposed to the right. You kind of shifted the shadow up so you can get less noise in digital terms, but you're basically also in danger of clipping the highlight if you're doing so, especially shooting a high ISO environment. So I guess a lot of digital photographers are kind of mistaken the ATTR issues, and then if you're brought up in the film photographer era, you totally understand where I'm coming from, especially if you do landscape yourself. You have done some film landscapes, way back in the SLR days, and you would definitely understand if you still have one of those gradual filters lying around, and yeah, you know how it works, right? This is a very, very simple thing. And in fact, there's still a lot of people, the proper landscape photographers, still use gradual filters because this is the best way to maximize everything, full stop. But ETTR is kind of like a lazy version of it, because then obviously you don't use gradual filters. You're just trying to utilize the dynamic range in the sensor to cover that, and by doing so, you're trying to shift the whole histogram to the right, to make sure that your shadow area is not completely black or basically clipping and resulting in lack of details and also total blackness. However, then you are actually doing the opposite. You may be risking losing the highlight detail altogether, especially in Micro Four Thirds, because Micro Four Thirds sensors has slightly tighter the highlight clipping values, so that it's actually slightly easier to clip the highlights than slightly the bigger sensors like the APS-C or the full frame sensors. So this is something you may have to understand just a little bit. But my title today, of course, should you be using high ISO or be afraid of using high ISO? Of course not. Because in my case, I can tell you, like from my own experience, is that if I need to take the shot, if I need to get that shot, I would put in whatever ISO value that I would like to. I know that Robin and Peter Forsgaard may have said that you can using lower ISO, for instance, a native ISO 200, because it's got greater dynamic range, 12.5 to 13 stop dynamic range, you can push the exposure later on in post, and let's say you underexpose your shot by 4 to 5 stops, using ISO 200, and you're going to just expose 5 times, 5 stop in Lightroom or any other software, you will get the same results as shooting in the 1600, for instance, and 3200. I actually kind of disagree, because I actually did that before, and I haven't actually got a scientific test in front of me, but I will do one. Maybe I'm going to do a proper YouTube videos for that particular topic, because I simply recall that I did a couple of shots that I accidentally set the ISO to 200 and 400. But I was about 3 to 4 stop underexposed to the actual correct value, and I'm trying to push it in post, and the result was horrible, really horrible. So the lower ISO dynamic range didn't really rescue the shot as such, and I'd rather shooting it high ISO. However, Robin did point out that if you shoot in high ISO, you will lose the fine details in the actual sensor, and that is correct, because the higher the ISO values, the less detail you're going to capture by the sensor. So if you want to maximize pixel to pixel in terms of details, like all the fibers on the cloth, or any the leaves in the foregrounds for landscape photography, or anything like to do with fine details, the lower ISO is always better, because you will capture all those fine lines and contrasts and things like that. High ISO, things will start to become like mushy, and then all gel together. It's pasty. It doesn't look very good at all. But it really depends on what sort of shot you're looking at, though. That's first. So we've got a few things here, and you guys are already chatting to yourself. Excellent. So basically, this is kind of my take on it. And I would always expose based on my requirements, that would be kind of my advice to anybody else. ETTR is yes and no depending on exact situation, but let's give you some examples here, and I do have some images here that I can kind of show you. But this is a film photo, of course. This is the first one that I want to show you. So this was shot with a 35mm 1.4 and is actually a very, very dim situations. It was raining heavily. It was about 6 o'clock in late afternoon in London, and what I always would suggest to anybody, before they even thinking about the setting of the camera, is to look for the correct light, and that is always the case, yeah. And without training your eyes to look for the right light, you can never get a great photo to start with, because the light is what shapes the subject. The light is what gives the subject, or whatever you want to photograph, the textures, the colors, and the contrast, and everything to do with light. Photography, the word itself is about light painting. It's all about light. So without that main element there, you can never ever going to capture a single photograph, full stop. Digital ISO is all about amplification to the sensitivity of each of the pixels itself. It's not so much about, in the old film days, it's about the chemicals, about the grains, all the other stuff in there. And so you just don't try not to think too technical about it. Otherwise, you're gonna really confuse yourself. So before you even touch a camera, if you're just, let's say, stepping into this particular street here, you're looking into this street, you're just trying to imagine yourself, okay, where are all the lights? What would be the best place if I want to photograph something like this, to get the colors, the emotions, and everything like that. Once you determine and find out exactly which one is the best spot to be, then either wait there until the subject turn up for street photography I'm talking about, and you just click the shutter. But in terms of exposure, you do the normal thing first. Yeah, that's my tips. Yeah. And do the exposure normally what you would set it to. If let's say for street photography, you want to freeze the moment, and you would do as a 1/250th second, 125th a second, depending on what sort of motion you want to capture. If they're walking slow, that will be okay. 1/120th should be fast enough to freeze the frame. But if you want to something like running, 1/250, maybe even 1/500, and then from that shutter speed, then you determine what sort of aperture value you need to use for that particular lighting situation. In film photography, of course, it's slightly trickier because you're kind of stuck in your whatever film stock in your camera, but in digital, you're way more flexible. But if you want to capture more things in focus, then you stop down your lens, and then you stop down to 2.8, whatever. And if you've got a wide angle lens, that means you've got a really deeper depth of field anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And so you can actually set to 2.8, 1/250th second for this particular shot. And then what? Just look for the ISO value, just to see whether you need to push it to 1600 or whatever, and then you just snap it. I don't really care about whether you shoot at 200 and push it back up. And for me, I just don't want to think, because capturing the shot is way more important and in this particular scenes and then anything else. Because what I don't want to is, I always worry about pushing things in post-productions. I'm always trying to get things right in camera first. So whatever I see, I need to see it, and I need to making sure the exposures, all the highlights and shadows are actually there before I would say that's good, or no, that's not good. This is kind of me as a professional photographer. This is me as a working photographer. Technicality can talk a lot of things, but when it comes to practicality, it comes into apply the theory, it may be totally different. And that is why, if you see a lot of tradesmen doing things, like whether they're going to be mechanics fixing your cars, or whether they're plumbers fixing your drains, if you study this sort of thing, it's totally different to these people actually doing the jobs with their hands, because they find out there are ways to do things that are actually better and more accurate than the books. And so technicality wise, I appreciate the theory behind it. I appreciate how important they are, of the ISO invariance, for instance. This is interesting to know about it, and because at the end of the day, digital photography, is getting more and more complicated than what it's supposed to be, what it should be, and people are drilling too much into the technicality of how the sensors and processor performs. This is the thing that I think it takes away the fun of photography. You're there really supposed to capture that moment, that shot, and that particular scene, and that reaction and emotion from the subject. Not so much about thinking too much. I always like to do things more like a second nature kind of thing. I just want to come up there, turn up with my camera. Oh, that's cool. Snap. That's it. That's my shot. And that is what I would put it forward to all photographers. This is another shot, basically, like similar thing. This is the very dim situations. I shot at 3200. And if based on what many other people are talking about using ETTR, I would probably shoot at 6400 and stop back down. But instead, no, I just shoot it at 3200. And this is still actually relatively slow shutter speed. I think it's 1/50th, 1/80th. You can see it's a little bit motion blur there. But I actually like that. I deliberately time myself to use a slightly slower shutter speed instead of using, let's say, a faster shutter speed at 100th or 120th second using 6400 ISO. So I choose to use 3200 because I want to introduce just a slight motion blur there to capture the actual actions in the shot, but maintaining the actual exposure of the entire scene. So, but then, should I really shoot at ISO 400 or 200 and push 5 stop up in post? I probably wouldn't do that. Like I said, I did experience things like in the past when I shoot it, like I mentioned earlier, when I shoot accidentally underexposure shot by like 4 or 5 stops, and then just out of curiosity in post-production, I push it all the way up in Lightroom. It absolutely destroyed the photograph. The shadow is horrible. The digital noise that coming out from the shadow being pushed, you're starting to see bandings and stuff like that. It's just horrible, horrible, horrible. I would not suggest you to do that. And I think what they are looking at specifically for both Peter Forsgard and Robin was looking at the highlights. If you look at their photos there, it's definitely more on the highlight than actually the shadow area. But if you're looking at scenes like this, in this particular scene here, if you're really pushing the shot, you will see the shadow just completely destroyed. You have to physically burn the photo, like dodging burns and localize exposure adjustment to make this shot work again, because you have to bring back down the shadow, making sure that it doesn't overcompensate and creating all those unwanted noises and banding. And this is kind of my take on it. Otherwise, you're going to end up frustrating yourself. Oh, ETTR doesn't work. Oh, whatever they said didn't work. What they said was technically correct, because shooting at ISO 200, you will get a lot more details on many things, and you do have a lot more dynamic range to play with. But to recreate the shot that you originally have in mind would take some work. That's what I'm saying, because if you are pushing in post, all the shadow is going to be completely overkill, and then you will definitely see a lot of noise, digital noise reappearing, and not necessarily lower noises than actually shooting at high ISO or the correct values for the exposure. So this is something you may have to kind of do a little bit of trial and error testing before you can agree or disagree with me. And but personally, I did a few things before, and I found that really didn't work for me. So I rather just decide what sort of exposure is correct for me, and then I would just shoot it anyway. I shoot it as a photographer would do. Look for the light, expose to the correct lighting, and then make the shot. You don't try to use ISO to rescue your shot. And this is what I always suggest to many photographers across the board, saying that high ISO is there to allowing you to see something that you're not supposed to see. Or I'm just joking, but like for me is that the most photographers would not really do shots like shooting constantly in 6400 and beyond that, because that's not really photography anymore. This is about something else. This is about paparazzi, about trying to capture something you really not supposed to see. That's something that I kind of would trying to remind yourself. Trevor, you do have something here. I find it's best to get a very good exposure when using high ISO, because pushing in post will give bad results compared to pushing That is exactly my point, right, Trevor? You probably experienced the same thing as I did. And I did have something like 200 ISO, 400 ISO before, and underexposed 2 to 3 stop accidentally before I set it to correct ISO values in later on in the scene. And out of curiosity, I was trying to push those shots back up to match that exposure, and the result was horrible and really destroying the photograph. Yes, you will get sharper images in the bits that you can still see, but for many other areas like shadow in particular, you'll find that the shadow would have a lot of this artificial artifacts and noises, really horrible stuff, like started to creep into the images and making your image looks even worse than shooting at 3200, maybe even 6400. And that's a fact. This is something I've seen it before, time and time again. And this is not just on Micro Four Third. I tried on Canon, I tried on Leica. They're all the same. So like I believe the ISO invariant is a terms about amplification. I totally understand the digital theory behind it, but in practicality, I would actually ignore it. I would actually ignore everything about ETTR and just shoot and expose to what you believe you as a photographer. You make the decision what you should be using. You fix the shutter speed and the aperture to the look that you want. For instance, whether you want motion blur, you want to freeze the frame, whether you want shallow depth of field or you want deeper depth of field, then you decide what sort of ISO value you need to get that exposure correct, right? Okay, so I think this is the correct way of thinking. Not trying to think about too much of ATTR or definitely not ISO invariant, trying to push it back up and create the same shot. I would not do that. That would be my take on it. So let's give you another example. Like I'm trying to show you a lot of the low light stuff here. So this once again, it was a film photography. So I'm using my Leica M6 in Hong Kong, and this was a ISO 400 film. I pushed 1 stop, so it's equivalent to an ISO 800 film speed. So it's a slightly blacker, slightly more contrasty shot that I would get. I was shooting f2.8 on my 35mm. Why didn't I shoot in 1.4? Because I wanted the depth of field, and because it's relatively static in this particular frame, so I was able to get away with 1/60th of a second, so relatively slow. This is another thing I would like to kind of talk to you guys about shutter speed in relation to focal length, because I'm going to show you a few more examples in a minute, and you can get away with movement, subject movement or even your camera movement, by using a wider focal length. Because when you're using a telefocal length, you've all learned about tele lenses. You need to use faster shutter speed to compensate all kinds of movement there, whether it's going to be subject or the camera. And this is kind of interesting, physical elements there. So you just have to making sure that you understand a little bit. So wider shot, you can get away with slower shutter speed. So in that case, you can use lower ISO and get cleaner shots. So that's why, like, when you see a lot of my shots in wedding, for instance, I use a wider angle lens. In a lot of cases, especially when you get to extreme low light situation, I don't mind getting close to my subject, to the bride and groom or anything else, because I can get away with low ISO, because people's movement, subject's movement is less critical in that sense compared to using a 25 or even 45, for instance, and they are a lot trickier to shoot in low light situation. Not about exposure, you can always get the right exposure, but it's the shutter speed I want to freeze the frame or to get away with the motion blur. So this is something that you kind of have to adjust yourself to your mindset, what sort of thing you should be using at any given time. So let's see, Bart, you got something to hear? Right, I know you like natural light where possible. Do you ever use flash? Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I'm going to show you example of using flash. There are many things to using flashes, and I think I have one shot here. Let me try to bring up another shot here, but let me give you one shot here first. And so this is a shot. Of course, you can see how dark this place was already. This is about 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night. And so in this particular case, you really should not use natural light. You really should need to should use artificial light. Yeah. So this is a remote speed light that was set behind the umbrella, and I just basically using the white umbrella as the bounce. So that was cool, right? So everything's quite easy. Remote trigger for my camera, wide angle like normally you would do. This is a 12 millimeters, so it's fine. This shot is perfect. You know, I wanted to keep the ambience of the actual evening. So like, I want to capture the purple sky because it's already sun's already passed, and then you still got just a little bit of color from for the castle itself, and the foliage, you know, the trees and then the grass absolutely darkened already. It's you know, for that you don't really need to see details because it's dark, yeah. Although having said that, it's actually got details, and you can actually look closer. There are details there, but in this particular case, I shoot in ISO 200. Yep, you heard that right. And because why? And then because of the flash freezes the moment. In this particular case, I'm not too worried about faster shutter speed. I can get away with 150, even 130 per second because it's nighttime. And then when I get it, of course, I have to make sure that the actual scene itself is correctly exposed, and I don't want to push anything whatsoever, and I just have to manually adjust the flash output, because by then if you're shooting at, let's say, 2.8 or f2, you need to make sure that you're not overexposing the light itself, because you know, any sort of light, artificial light can easily clip the entire thing. So you actually need to turn down the flash quite a bit to get this shot working. So just bring up Trevor here. You got something to say here. And when shooting high dynamic scene, you need to decide whether highlights or shadow are most important and exposed for that, and also know what you can then push in process. That's correct. This is about understanding. You know, the more you work in this sort of environment, the more understanding you know about exposures, of where and when to push or pull things back. This is, you know, you cannot, it's not given. You have to earn it. You have to learn about it. You know, it's hard to explain because situations are different. Every situation is different. Every lighting condition is different. And this is another prime example why I never given the EXIF data to people, because you know, on all my YouTube review videos, you know, people always asking, can you tell me the setting of the your camera, you know, and what's the aperture, what shutter speed did you use to capture that shot? I always reluctantly to say, you know, no, I don't want to give it out, because lighting situation is always different. You can't go back to the same place and take the same shot using the setting I gave you. It will never ever work. You know, okay, they may try to understand motion blur and depth of field and things like that. I mean, I kind of makes sense if that's what they want. But if they purely trying to capture that shot using the setting I give you, it just simply would not work, because it changes all the time. I go back to this place now. If this particular photo, if I go back there, I'll probably have to use completely different setting altogether. You know, regardless, you know, even though they may be the same lighting, sorry, same time, whatever, but the light could be totally different once again. So it's just not the same every time. You have to learn it, you have to experience it, and then once you've got enough experience, you definitely will be able to adjust your brain and know what sort of thing you should be doing with your camera. The camera is a tool, it's your tool. You know, you handle and control that tool to get the shot that you want. Let's just give you another shot here. And so once again, this is another bridal shot that I did there, and I purely just using the window light. It's a massive window, which is what a photographer usually uses for natural light photography. In this particular case, I did not use any flash at all, although I wanted to, but I thought this actually works very well, because the window light, first of all, is already softened the lights quite a bit when the light actually hits the bride herself, and the flowy dress or the texture is revealed by that light. And in the background itself, it just only got just enough light to, you know, show the details and things like that. So I think this actually works quite well. So if I introduce artificial light, I was starting to have to introduce multiple sources of light, not just one, not two. I probably need 3 to 4 speed lights or LED light, whatever source you choose to shape these scenes again. So rather than doing that, I just use the window light and I shoot at slightly higher ISO, because I needed to stop down the exposure to get things in focus. I don't want it to, because in this shot, if you're using ultra shallow depth of field, it just wouldn't work. And this is another prime example. You don't use ultra shallow depth of field all the time to separate your subjects and the background. It doesn't always work. In this particular case, I like to see the detail. I like to see the stairs, the actual handrails and the textures of the wall and everything. I like to see it. So I'd rather have stop down, get all the textures there and boost the ISO, and then making sure I still get the correct light and exposure. So this is why I choose to work with the brain rather than trying to use methodologies to take a shot. You invented your own method at the end of the day. You invented, as a photographer, your way of shooting a particular scene. And I do believe strongly that each photographer has different approaches to different scenes. And if they can make the shot, well done, job done. That's really good for you. There is no right or wrong way of doing things as long as you get that shot right. That's what I wanted to say. Let's see if I got another one here. This is another one that's really I just want to show an extreme. This shot, I remember that I couldn't even see the person. It was pitch black, and I had to take about 4 or 5 shots to get that right, because eventually what I need to do is ask my assistant to use a flash to actually lit them up, so I can focus. I have to manual focus because my camera just couldn't see anything in the scene. It was completely dark, but I still put the remote flash at the back. But all I need is the initial focus, so I need to set it to manual focus. I need to see them. So like my assistant using the flash gun just to show it their faces. So I manual focus them, and then after that switch out the flash gun and just boom, just use the speed light to do the job. There were 2 speed lights there, one in the front, one in the back. But this is just extreme, it was nothing special, but I just want to highlight how difficult it can be in photography. So instead of using like ISO 12,800 to see things, I don't want that, because it would be creepy. The noise is horrible, and you lose a lot of detail. In this particular case, I actually used ISO 400. Wasn't even 200, so I just basically snapped this shot using a much lower ISO, using the light coming from the speed light to shape the scene altogether. So let's see here, and I may have another one here, and right. So this is this shot that you may have seen already, one of my most popular wedding shots kind of ever, because of the amount of people that actually involved in this particular scene. There's about 120 of them in total. So I was shooting with the 7-14 f2.8 Pro on the EM1 Mark II. I was shooting an ISO 800 for this particular shot. But one beauty of the Micro Four Third is because you got much deeper depth of field to play with in any given time. So that means that in this sort of shots, even I was shooting an f2.8 is equivalent to f5.6. But imagine shooting at 7mm, which kind of 14mm in full frame terms. 5.6 is a very deep scene, so you can get a lot of things in focus. And I'm not joking, I can still see the faces at the back row of that staircase, and that's how good it was. So even at ISO 800, it was fine. So would I want to choose the ISO 200 and push 3 stop and to get that shot? No, I still want that thing there because I want to capture all the confetti coming down. And then so everything was natural light. I didn't use flash at all because otherwise it will kill the ambience. In this particular case, I would not want that. Otherwise, like I said, if you want to create these scenes, if it's in a movie set, you need a lot of different light sources to even out the entire scene, making sure every bit that you want to see is exposed correctly. And as another thing here, I want to show you guys. So another shot, window lights again, very typical. That I love window lights, as you can see that it does the good job of diffusing the entire scene quite a bit, especially if you've got multiple windows and doors that's shining through the room, and you can see that the lights are pretty even there. But even so, that your camera could still need to push up a little bit just to get that shot, especially the detail in the shadows. In that particular case, you will need to shoot a lower ISO to play with the dynamic range just a little bit to bring down the highlight. And but in that case, I will actually expose to the highlight, not to the shadow, because when you're shooting a low ISO, you got better dynamic range. You can actually lift up the shadow by 1 or 2 stops without sacrificing too much quality. So that will be, once again, using your experience to make a judgment, make a technical judgment, what you should be doing. And let's go through another one. And this is a very low light shot here, and you can see that it's actually in a aisle, covered aisle, just one light source. And remember what I told you about looking for the correct light, and this is the prime examples of that, because there was one tungsten light just above him, the model, and you can see that actually at the back there, it's actually very bright outside, but I really wanted to get the mood going on there. So like, instead of walking in and out and trying to use high ISO to bail out the pictures, I just want to ask him to stand just before he go directly under the tungsten light itself, so that his face is lit up by that light source, even though it's just barely, but I can expose the light. So in that case, you know, you're fine. So looking for the light is always key for any photography, making sure that you do know, and not trying to use the ISO or any other method trying to rescue the shots. That's what I would like to say. Let's see if there's another one here. Yep, this is a church, right? A church environment, and it's always tricky because you don't know where the light's going to hit. You don't know what the church is going to look like. You know for a fact it's going to be low light, so most likely you're going to be shooting 2.8 and larger aperture like f2, 1.8, 1.4, 1.2, whatever. You try to get the exposures correct. Especially you may want to use slightly high ISO depending on how static they are. And but for let's say the bride walking down the aisle, and then you will need to freeze the frame a little bit, so then you may have to shoot 1/100th second or 1/120th second to freeze that stepping, unless you want to create motion blur in purpose. But otherwise, they usually are relatively still. Then you can slow the shutter speed to 1/80th a second, and you using low ISO to bail out the actual image quality itself. Cool stuff. Okay, and maybe a couple of last shots, and that will be it for today. So this particular shot, you can see it's actually evening, and this is the time when I fully utilize the IBIS of the camera and to do longer exposure. I think this is 1/30th, maybe even 1/15th of a second, so very slow shutter speed. I asked the subject to stay as still as possible, but if you can see the light above them, you see the star trail coming down, I stopped down the lens to f8. Yes, f8. And even though it's lower light situation, but like I said, many times, again and again, I'm going to repeat again, you decide what you want to shoot with whatever setting you want, you know. And in this particular case, I pushed the ISO a little bit higher. I did, because I want to shoot f8. I want to have that star coming down for start. I want to see the entire scene in focus. You can see all the branches at the back, so all in focus, nice and sharp. And also the correct shutter speed. In this particular case, I wanted to be slightly slower, so I can see the light trail coming on either side of the subjects. So this is exactly what I'm talking about. There's no definitive method, there's no definitive settings. You just have to experience and learn from everyday shooting, and you apply your knowledge and experience to every single shot you want to take. That's it, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed today's photography thing, you know. And so should you be afraid of high ISO? Absolutely not. You just need to get that shot if you need to, and then and that will be it. But remember what I said, learn, shoot more. The more experienced you become, the better photographer you are eventually. So thank you for joining me today, and absolutely fun. You know, I always like to talk about photography. You can see that I'm energetic when I come to talking about these sort of thing, and I can talk for hours. I'm not joking. Yeah, I can talk for hours, but I know that I won't be able to do it now because my kids are starting to scream. My wife's going to go up to shopping in a minute, so I have to stop right here. So I will see you guys tomorrow, my last stream for this week, and then I will see you all tomorrow. Tomorrow at 9. Not I keep saying 9 a.m. for some reason. 11 a.m. And if not, then I'll see you next week, and have a great day today. Once again, the sun is shining. It's definitely feeling summer. And as I'm still in t-shirt and shorts, you can't see my bottom, right? And I'm just actually wearing shorts. In fact, I'm not wearing anything. No, I'm joking. Okay, right. Thank you guys for joining me. Don't forget, I have a Wednesday YouTube live, and at the moment I'm still asking for people ideas what you guys want to talk about. I think some people already talking about your most who inspire you in photography, or like who was your favorite photographers. If you like that, give me a thumbs up, and then also leave some comment maybe in my YouTube community page, and then we can discuss something next week. Nice stuff. Okay, guys, and I can see my kids are laughing out loud at the moment. So you guys have a good day, and I will see you guys next time. Ciao, ciao.